Today is April 29th, 2014, and this is episode 105. This program is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Cryptocurrency is a new field of study. Consult your local futurist, lawyer, and investment advisor before making any decisions whatsoever for yourself. Welcome to Let's Talk Bitcoin, a twice-weekly show about the ideas, people, and projects building the digital economy and the future of money. My name is Adam B. Levine, and today we're back in New York with Stephanie on the day after the recent Inside Bitcoins event. She sat down with LTB favorites Jonathan Mohan and Jeffrey Paul to talk regulation and realism, walking time bombs of companies, and the magic of price discovery. Enjoy the show.
This is the Let's Talk Bitcoin podcast wrap-up of the Inside Bitcoin's New York City event. I am Stephanie, of course, and I've got with me Jonathan Mohan and Sneak Jeffrey Paul. And hi, guys. Thanks so much for joining me.
And thanks for inviting me. It's I made it here last minute for this conference, and I'm really excited to be here. It's so much larger than every other Bitcoin conference I've ever been to. It's really amazing to me.
Yeah, it's always fun to get on.
Yeah, you guys have both been on the show before, so I think people know you. But, just in case anyone's meeting you for the first time, Jonathan, you are the organizer of the Bitcoin NYC meetups. Yeah. And you can introduce yourself if you want to.
Yeah, so I do a meetup group for New York, which we've had 57 meetups in 12 months. So that says as it relates to our activity. And I also am the New York representative for Ethereum. So any hate or love can come my way for that.
Cool. And should I call you Jeffrey or Sneak?
You can call me Jeffrey. That's totally fine.
Okay.
All computer hackers have to have two names. Mm-hmm. They have their name that goes on the indictment, and then they have their name that they use on the internet.
Right.
So I'm excited to be out here. My role in Bitcoin is really a lot. Pretty much, it's an observer. As I got into Bitcoin through the cryptography side of things. I've been a hacker and whatnot for years. And I started talking about it years ago when no one was listening. And now it's cool because now everyone is listening. And it's really exciting to see huge conferences going down that would not have been possible even 12 months ago. Being at San Jose last year and kind of getting this feel that Bitcoin is about to explode. This is the last time we're going to know everyone in this room. And then coming here and suddenly not knowing anyone in the room. It was, we knew it was coming, but now this 2014 is really an incredible year for Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that, actually. I think that's a perfect way to lead into the discussion about this conference. It was big. It was at a large space. They definitely had a venue where there was plenty of room to expand.
Yeah, it's actually the Javits Center, which is where Comic-Con and just pretty much any major trade show in New York City is held there. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, it was in a very tiny part of the Javits Center, but just that it's in there alone, that's like the Carnegie Hall of conferencing. So it's pretty
surprised me a lot when I saw that.
There was a big billboard outside that kept, flashing the signs for different events that were going on, and just seeing Inside Bitcoin up in lights, was pretty cool because a lot of people pass by that.
It was on buses too.
All of my friends in New York City who have known me for years have heard me, this crank talking about internet money for years and years, and suddenly it's on buses everywhere, and I've got like 4 or 5 like camera phone shots of it just in the last couple of weeks. Like, hey, the Bitcoin thing you've been talking about, it's at the Javits. And so it was a wake up call for me.
Right. So Media Bistro really does know how to put on an event that gets a lot of press. We saw a lot of mainstream media, just like their event last year. They had another event in New York City that was very well attended by sort of mainstream press. This year, we saw tons of investors and VCs, of course, as I think we're expecting for an event like this. But you said, Jeffrey, that you didn't know a lot of the faces there and you were surprised about that. Can you talk a little bit more?
Well, I knew that Bitcoin was expanding in terms of just mind share, forgetting about the actual currency itself, or just the mind share. People who know about it, people who talk about it, people who have even a fundamental understanding. And obviously every year it gets bigger, but it's the rate at which people have been learning about it has been growing, I think. There was one of the Let's Talk Bitcoins from January, I think it was. 2014 is going to be the year of Bitcoin, and that's absolutely true. This is going to become the year that everyone, even if they don't understand Bitcoin, knows what it is. Right. And walking into a giant hall, and yes, like you said, it's a small section of the hall, but walking into a giant hall, seeing it on buses, and walking into this room where there are these people just milling around And it took me 10 minutes before I found one face I knew. And every other Bitcoin event I've ever been to, I find 3 people in the first 30 seconds. This time I was lost in a sea. And this really just shows how much business interest there is, how much economic interest there is from the academic side of things, economists and policymakers and regulators, and then also just entrepreneurs and programmers and engineers and people building new companies and new services in the ecosystem. It's really exciting right now.
Which is, there's actually a book that I'd recommend everyone check out, which is Crossing the Chasm, which essentially it's a seminal work on how technology gets adopted and the phases of adoption. And, one of my favorite talks was this guy, I think it was a DEF CON talk, where he brings out the booklet. And the booklet was every single person who was on the internet. It's like 80 names, and it included their phone number, their full name, and their home address. And that was the internet. And so when you're talking about how you couldn't see any
before
faces,
the internet even existed.
I mean, that's what the internet was. And as we see Bitcoin go through the same process, we're seeing exactly the same thing. And I think sort of a consequence of that is sort of the what they focused on at their conference. So, it's sort of an interesting thing to see what the Texas conference focused on, and the difference between a community-driven media event versus when industry does it and how they approach it. So I think we were talking before, how surprised you were, happy, yay, that it was very regulatory focused.
I was not happy about that. But that's a good segue in to talk about that. There was, I think, a huge focus on regulation, even on the panel that I was on, which was called Bitcoin Remittances in the Developing World. I thought that was going to be like one of the panels that was more human interest and more humanitarian focused. But even on that panel, most of the panelists were talking about regulations. And to me, it struck me really odd, because that's not the focus of a panel about like micro lending and remittances. Yeah. I mean, the focus is on the people who need money, right?
I think the flip side of that coin is that it has to focus on the people who are building these systems and subject to national laws. As the sphere of Bitcoin's influence grows, we can't help but have regulators who traditionally move very, very slowly. They're starting to come into the fold. There's been enough press about Bitcoin. And these people are not stupid. We might not like what they do sometimes, but they're not stupid, and they're hearing about this. And anything that we do, especially humanitarian efforts, are going to have to, it would be a shame to build something that allows microlending or something that actually helps people and changes people's lives, and then have the regulators come in and say, well, you didn't cross this T or you didn't dot this I, we're going to shut you down. That'd be a tragedy. And so if we're going to do it in America, we have to kind of...
I disagree with that, because there's so many things that you can do with Bitcoin that just can't be regulated. They take place on a peer-to-peer, totally decentralized in a decentralized way, and regulations just, don't really matter to those kind of things.
Well, if you look at Andreessen, he was on a talk, and he said, hey, look, what we're seeing in Bitcoin is the maturation of an industry. What that means is the fringe elements, once it matures, you get more and more people, and Bitcoin becomes less and less fringe, and then the people who were fringe go on to the next fringe thing. So, that what you might be experiencing is just the selling out or the maturation of the space. And I actually think that as it relates to Bitcoin, I don't think Bitcoin's going to be the thing we wanted it to be from the visionary standpoint, from the change the world sort of standpoint. I actually think that, these ideas of smart contracts and that DAOs and DACs, that those are the things I think that will be non-regulatable, because they have regulation internal to the system. Mm-hmm. I think this niche, this idea of regulating something, regulating a system, is needed, and Bitcoin doesn't have that internal to itself. So when Mastercoin comes online, I think it could do that for Bitcoin. But, insofar as that Mastercoin or is it now Bitcoin, I really think that the idea of regulation needs to be there, but that I don't think we need government regulators doing it. I think we could do it internal. But I don't think once we do that,
But they don't think you can do it.
If only government regulators agreed with you.
Yeah.
Right.
Just as a business person, you look at the environment in America, and I've spoken with a few people in the federal government about Bitcoin recently, and the idea that it can just be Wild West, even if it's not. Let's say Bitcoin had features that allowed it to continue being like that, the regulators are not willing to accept that. And honestly, Bitcoin lacks, it doesn't have quite the completely anonymous nature that a lot of people thought it did, and it can be regulated in the U.S. as we've seen, and I think that's going to continue whether we like it or not. So, just from a business standpoint or even a humanitarian standpoint, we have to figure out how to coexist with regulation for in the U.S.
Well, I mean, I look at it in terms of how can I do a business in it, and Andreas explicitly states, I'm going to talk about this space, but I'm not going to be doing a business in it because those are the people they go after. And that's exactly why you see regulators and entrepreneurs interested in that discussion, because when you say regulation, you're not talking regulation. What you're talking about is, liability reduction. Like what can I do? How do I need to dance as a monkey? Like, so that the government won't throw me in jail. So I think when you see the House packed, what you're actually seeing is the interest in Bitcoin. And insofar as they don't want to go to jail, they have to listen to this guy talk.
But let's be honest about that. I mean, nobody really says that. They're all doing this song and dance and saying, "Oh, it's for the protection of the consumer. This Bitcoin thing is too dangerous for you, and it's for your own good." Well, I mean, that's just crap.
I forgot. I think it was not to get too deep. I think it was Nietzsche or somebody. It's like the slave morality, which is when your environment forces you into something that you didn't get to choose, you then make a virtue out of it culturally and turn it into a positive. So, for instance, this notion of Americans or New Yorkers as greedy, whereas I was talking to a European and he said, "Hey, look, we see that as you get one job, you do it, you're the best you do." And I said, well, how much of that is an extension of you having social programs that don't need you to worry about wants in the same way that we do as New Yorkers, and how much of that as New Yorkers, the extension to which we can achieve our dreams here, whereas we don't need to be satiated by just being an amazing butcher or an amazing nutritionist or plumber. We could actually change the world by being here. So it's sometimes it's the cart leading the horse, where it's sometimes it's the environment that you then are forced into that you make a virtue out of. So I think these people, these entrepreneurs, don't even realize that they're a slave to the system, or they do. But, in order to see themselves in the mirror and sort of face it, that they need to make a virtue out of it rather than a vice, because that's how they can deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you there that people do often make virtues out of things that aren't virtues and that they have no control over, just to get by. But a lot of the moral support that people give stuff like regulation, they don't have to be giving it that moral support. There are
ways to protect consumers without getting government thugs involved. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. But I mean, some of the reason that, take taxes, for instance. The IRS doesn't have the manpower to go and audit everyone's tax return and track every single dollar you spend and make sure you're reporting every piece of taxable income. And, the reason that they get so much tax revenue is because people obediently and dutifully file and report it. So much of their power is just in people's minds. And so when people lend legitimacy to the concept of let's try to regulate this wild Bitcoin, and even the words that we use are important, like trust and legitimacy and fringe, like you said before. You hear a lot of that vocabulary at conferences like this. That's all optional. We don't need to be using those words. Bitcoin is already legitimate. And we don't need trust this person, because Bitcoin is designed so that you don't need trust. It's a trustless, decentralized system. So why are we talking about bringing legitimacy to it? It already has legitimacy.
Well, I think that kind of ignores one thing, is that Bitcoin exists in a vacuum. And this idea that the government has authority, in a lot of cases, only in people's minds, not in practice. But I mean, Bitcoin only has value in people's minds. And for Bitcoin to have value for most people who use cryptocurrencies in the economic state of the earth in the next couple decades, have never used them today. And
although I would also like to say that the intrinsic value argument infuriates me to no end, because value only has value in people's mind. I would like to see
the subjective theory.
I would like to see some food or some gold with no humans on the planet, and then you argue to me how much value that has.
Certainly, the subjective theory of value is the one I subscribe to, and everybody has their own. But I think that this idea that it only has power in their minds, or only has value in their minds, is an important one that we need to pay attention to. So most people that are using cryptocurrency, 5 or 10 years from today, which will be, I think, most people on the planet, is certainly 10 years out. Most people on the planet will be using some sort of decentralized cryptocurrency. To get to that point, right now, Bitcoin exists in a vacuum. You can't get in or out of it without touching some business, whether it's a person on a street corner that you meet, or whether it's an exchange on a website that you sign up with. And those people have real considerations as far as their businesses and things like that. And so that's something that we really need to pay attention to. We can't just say like Bitcoin doesn't matter, or rather that regulation doesn't matter, because it does matter to the people that are going to be using these things.
It does. I agree. And it matters and it affects businesses. Absolutely. But I'm saying that there are some parts of the Bitcoin ecosystem that don't have to care and that don't have to worry about it so much.
Right.
And that I think people give regulation and government like way more power than it actually has because they believe in its power. You know what I mean? It's the subjective theory of power.
It's a good one.
But you got to free your mind, and I don't know. You go to a conference like this and you see some people who, like, their talks really excite me, like they're talking about the future and they're talking about ideas and they're talking about like how Bitcoin is going to change the world and technologies that are built on top of it and blockchains and stuff that's like Bitcoin is going to change the world. That's the exciting thing. I don't really, get excited about legal Bitcoin stuff.
That there are going to be rocks on that path to that world. Now, my focus right now is making it as safe and easy as possible for people to not trip over those rocks on the way between the system we have now, which is essentially total government control, to total popular control, where people individually can control their monetary future. And
sometimes you don't have to worry about tripping on the rocks if you just go around them. I know we're like taking this metaphor way too far. But
I see in the short...
It's like a river,
In the short term, I see most people who don't necessarily have our ideological attitude where they're willing to maybe make sacrifices or be inconvenienced to go around the rocks. But I think a lot of people just don't care about these things, and they might want to use them. And if their life is made, like people who are using Mt. Gox, a perfect example, those people would have been benefited by regulation because maybe they wouldn't have lost money that was important to them. And whether or not you think the regulation is a good or bad thing, in this one case, it may have actually saved some people some money.
That's also unseen. There's an unseen part of that too, because it would cost other people,
certainly.
Yeah, by regulation.
But I also think that it's also sort of a crock of poop. It was because of the regulation, and by that I mean the lack of, which is to say we'll throw you in jail no matter what you do, in New York and in America, that prevented American companies from going online, that made Mt. Gox. TradeHill had 3 implementations, 4 if you count, I forget how you count them, where they were compliant each and every freaking time. Mm-hmm. And if you look at every single time they did it, the last time they actually had a credit union, they actually had it working. TradeHill worked for 3 days. And then the federal government called the credit union and scared them into closing their account. So if you're saying that regulations, if we had better regulations or we had regulations, Mt. Gox wouldn't happen, I say that it was the regulators who caused Mt. Gox to happen, because I can list, more companies than I have fingers on my hands that would have been online and operating and doing way more volume than Mt. Gox would have, and were trustworthy and wouldn't have done that massive scam.
CryptoKit is the world's first Chrome browser Bitcoin wallet. It's the easiest, fastest Bitcoin wallet payment system. With a simple one-click install, it takes just seconds to get your wallet set up. And because CryptoKit finds the address and payment for you, there's no more fussing around or tab switching. CryptoKit is more than just a wallet. It comes with a preloaded PGP encrypted social network, news feeds from Reddit and Google, and up-to-date charts from exchanges. Finally, CryptoKit Directory allows you to make 2-click payments with any of the BitPay merchants. Once you install CryptoKit, you won't need anything else. For more information or to download CryptoKit, visit CryptoKit.com.
Hey folks, Adam B. Levine here with an experimental sponsor today, a hiring one. David Johnston said it best, anything that can be decentralized will be decentralized. Reverse Dealer is that idea applied to buying and selling of cars. At Reverse Dealer, the people are the dealership, and the whole point is to save everybody money. The founder writes, quote, "We are the exact opposite of a traditional dealer. We are the change we want to see in the world, and we are currently hiring. They're looking for one skilled developer, a social marketing expert, and they're interested in speaking with additional investors as well. Interested? Send an email to reversedealer@gmail.com.
It's important to point out those things that aren't readily apparent. You know, sometimes the hidden consequences of laws and regulations can be really huge, and they're unseen. So people just say, "Oh, look at all the benefits that come from this," but there's costs too.
My thing is this: I know that regulators are not subscribing to this, and they have a lot more power in these markets than we do, unfortunately. So I see just the business path, and I mean that's what we're seeing already. Like you said, there are lots of businesses that would have been online if not for these, and the reason for that is because the regulatory environment is powerful, and we have to cope with it in some way, whether we embrace the regulations. And I've talked to a number of people who have talked about innovating in terms of not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. I mean, financing terrorism is something that everyone wants to stop. Financing violence is something that nobody wants to actually have happen. And so as an industry, there are probably ways of innovation within Bitcoin and within cryptocurrencies of stopping things like that the regulators have not thought of yet because they're still working on the old model. And so I think that there will be some sort of symbiosis in the future because, nobody wants to finance criminals. Nobody wants to finance, I
don't want to finance criminals, which is why I try not to use the dollar.
Yeah, right. And I don't either want to finance criminals and terrorists, but anyone can be labeled a criminal or a terrorist for doing things that don't hurt anyone, for simply moving, over $3,000 from one bank account to another, or $10,000 across an international border. I mean, who have they harmed? What's the crime there? But they're a terrorist suddenly because somebody wrote it down on a piece of paper.
I think everyone pretty much been through this struggle, of what is criminal and what isn't. That's why my first go-to word there was violence. Like, I think there are certain parts of what regulation is designed to do that we can all agree on. And the regulators, of course, use this as their go-to. Well, if you don't comply with regulation, then you're going to be financing terrorists. And that's scary to a lot of people. Especially, being here in New York, like that's something that resonates with people.
I think that what people like to forget is, history likes to repeat itself, and people tend to forget how cyclical these things are. George Bush got a lot of heat when he compared himself to Lincoln. Good old George W. Bush said, they said, who do you most think of yourself as? And he said, I most see myself as Abraham Lincoln. They're like, oh, it's preposterous. If you actually go back to what he said, Abraham Lincoln did speeches where he said he needed to suspend habeas corpus and the Fourth Amendment and search and seizure in order to fight the terrorists.
Wow.
And the terrorists he was referring to were pirates in the waters. So when George Bush compares himself to Lincoln, it's actually a very astute. He is the 20th century Lincoln, 21st, excuse me. Everything is cyclical. You really just need to look back and see the lies that they tell us now, or the lies they told us 200 years ago, or the lies they told us 3,000 years ago. There's always going to be a reason to take liberty away from you. And the question is the reason more legitimate now than it was 200 years ago? And why do we need it taken away now when we didn't need it taken away then?
I think the human concerns that drive those cycles are probably the same today as they've always been.
Sure,
and
fear.
Whether you're getting attacked on the high seas or if some sketchy dude in Japan disappears with your money, people are afraid. And what I kind of want, my drive here is not whether or not we comply with regulation. It's not whether or not there are regulators or it's possible to be regulated. It's just how do we help people out the most by building businesses and building useful things and making people able to exercise their basic rights. And I think if we're going to do that in America, then that means some level of regulation, just because the regulators aren't going to suddenly go away. I'm really excited to see, even with the somewhat oppressive regulatory environment we seem to have, there's tons of new companies and there's tons of new way more than I would have expected, considering the guidance that's come out about what the regulators want. There's several new exchanges that I saw, several new trading platforms that I saw. I've heard talk of funds and things like that. And so it's really interesting to me to see that even despite all this, there's still this fertile ground. The mind reels what will happen in a country that decides that they're going to be completely hands off Bitcoin and allow anyone to come and build a business around this. Like the country that does that is going to explode. Right now,
we're already seeing that with Switzerland and perhaps Hong Kong and other places around the world, and Panama, and Bitcoin companies moving to those places. I think it's still an open question what is going to be the best place in the world for Bitcoin. But one thing's for sure, Bitcoin can always go all over the world.
I'm excited.
The question is, where is the best place in the world for Bitcoin entrepreneurs?
Right, yes.
Bitcoin is fine. It's an abstract idea in numbers.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for that.
It's us in the meat space I worry about.
Yeah. It's interesting, the idea of some of the ideas in Ethereum and other people working on self-executing entities and autonomous companies and smart contracts, smart property. So these things will, as you pointed out, sort of resist regulation, but they set up, in some ways, a new jurisdiction that is not in a given place. And I think that there's going to be innovation in sort of jurisdictional positioning. Like the lawyers are going to have to catch up to the new reality of, and they will, because I mean this is how things are happening. I don't think there will be that many ruffled feathers, but to perhaps some sort of special law or category of law that applies to things that exist virtually within the internet that are governed by cryptography, as opposed to a national jurisdiction. We're definitely headed there. I see that very soon. So.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, let's turn this conversation a little more positive, away from the gloom and doom of government. And, Jeffrey, I wanted to focus in on something that you said, which was that you walk through the conference floor with all the exhibitor booths, and all of these companies were new. You were surprised to see some of these companies coming up, and these exchanges that you mentioned, are these the people who were saying 6 months ago, a year ago, oh yeah, I'm going to start a new exchange? And are you skeptical of that at all? Because there were a lot of people saying that, and they were getting a lot of investment. But.
There were a lot of people saying that, lots of investment. There's, I think there's still a lot of money in Bitcoin right now, chasing too few deals. Mm-hmm. There aren't, as far as I see, that many great deals in Bitcoin right now, as far from the opportunities for investment in the companies, but there are several, and I'm skeptical by default of anything. That's kind of what I do. I'm a hacker, and so the moment someone comes to me and says, "Oh, well, this is secure," I say, "Well, really? That's interesting." And I said the same thing about Bitcoin when I first discovered Bitcoin.
Well, the best thing you could do for a product is say it's unhackable, right?
Totally. We're going to find out. Anytime someone says that, we find out very quickly whether or not it's true. And that was, that's one of the reasons I don't really have many Bitcoin today, is because, like everything else that is new that claims to be unhackable, I didn't buy it. But there are a lot of businesses starting, and I guess this is, I forget who said this, but someone pointed out that a good startup seems like a bad idea at the time, but is actually a good idea. So there's this class of things that seem like bad ideas, and then there's some little sliver in them that are actually good ideas. You just can't see them yet.
We actually had that conversation on our way here, where I said that I wanted to resolve all judgment about Counterparty, because it is an innovation. It does sound great, but it's a type of thing where immediately when I heard it, it's like, that sounds like a horrible idea. Proof of burn. What are you doing? My poor money. But, the more I look at it, the more I'm like, hey, this does pass the smell test. I just need to reserve judgment until I learn more about it.
I think a lot of the businesses that we're seeing pop up are probably terrible ideas, considering the regulatory environment. I could have started many of them and didn't, because I'm afraid of the future in terms of what's going to happen in the United States. There's a lot of regulation that I'm sure we haven't seen yet that's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months as more and more. I mean, Mt. Gox is not going to be the last one. There are going to be other idiots that start companies and try.
Oh yeah,
as long as there are people, there are going to be idiots.
But that's not to be discouraged. I mean, the whole point of a free market is that you get the idiots out.
Yeah,
and the worst thing that you could have is these bailouts that keep the idiots around, so you can never actually flush the system.
Yeah, they have to be allowed to fail.
I mean, the whole point of a free economy is to have failure. If you don't have fires in a forest, the entire system breaks down.
Mm-hmm. I just see that there's a lot of fear right now from a lot of people, because now there's more people to be afraid. I guess that's the big difference, is that a year or two ago, everyone was like, oh yeah, Mt. Gox, it's terrible. It's gonna collapse. And then it did collapse. But when it collapsed, there were so many more people in the Bitcoin space than when we first started seeing signs that it was going downhill, that it had a much bigger effect than I thought it was going to in terms of perception and attitudes about Bitcoin. The stakes are higher now. Even people that didn't have money in it, they point to it and say, well, this is bad. This might be bad because of this. And it's not an actual practical concern. It's more of an emotional concern, because I want to see Bitcoin businesses explode. I want to see more and more, like you were saying, I want a free market. I want people to start 10 businesses and then for them to all try 10 different things, 9 of them to go under and the one to succeed. The standard entrepreneurial startup ecosystem. I love that kind of stuff. I love building things, conducting experiments and finding out if they work. And this is going to spur all kinds of innovation for new service categories, and now we have multi-sig, and there's all sorts of new businesses around that. I met with Will from BitGo yesterday. They're doing a really cool thing that's going to really help a lot of people, I think, because they have a multi-sig setup that is a lot safer than what most people are using, and I'm sure they're the first of many different service providers that are going to be offering that.
A multi-sig setup for what?
For Bitcoin holdings.
Okay.
So whereas, you can set it up so you have 2 of 3 keys required. And so your exchange or your online wallet holds one of them. And then you have one in cold storage and you have another one on your computer. So if any one of these 3 points is compromised, then you don't lose all of your money.
So for instance, in the case of a free aid, if blockchain were to have something like this, blockchain could have said, hey, you withdrew more than $200 today. That's an abnormal behavior for you. Do you want us to confirm this, or could you take your money, your third key out of cold storage and sign this to confirm that you wanted to take more than $200 out?
Right.
And that could prevent things like that.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of companies using these new technologies to make things safer. And I'm excited about that, because it's going to mean that there are fewer instances where regulators say, well, something must be done, and come in and try to meddle with the perfectly working economy.
Somehow I doubt that. But I do think there's a need for security and greater and services in the area of security and insurance and all that kind of stuff. So I'm glad to see those things popping up. Another thing that I really wanted to talk about on this show was there was a lot of buzz at this conference about MaidSafe. Did you guys hear that? Like, everybody seemed to be talking about it, along with, of course, like the kind of Bitcoin 2.0 type of protocols, like everybody kind of making their own coin, or, company IPOs and things like that. We had a talk from Xavier Hawk with permacredits, and he was talking about this sort of, it's built on counterparty, and it's a currency that's backed by the permaculture ecosystem. I'm sure you'll hear more about that later. But, John, you also had a talk about DAX and DAOs. Yeah. And so that was exciting to me. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you said in your talk about DAX?
I think that the thing that's least understood about distributed autonomous organizations, or whatever you want to call them, is the most transformative thing that they do is they create price discovery where there was none before. So I like to call it let there be price, which is, it's a light switch. So when we're looking at behaviors or systems where there is no price discovery, there is no capacity to know whether or not you wish to invest in that behavior as a business, or to do it in any way, because you have no idea. But once there's a price mechanism, and that price mechanism will not go away, which once you create a distributed autonomous system, that price vehicle, that thing that is creating the price discovery will still exist. It'll always be incentivized for people to do it. Because what happens is, once you have price discovery, it doesn't matter how risky or how dangerous, it doesn't matter how hard or annoying, there will always be someone willing to do it, because that just means the price gets higher. The concerns related to the service or the product get internalized into the price that the market's willing to bear for it, and the service will always be rendered. There may not be that large of a volume for it, but it will always be rendered by somebody, because there's always someone doing something for the right price. And I think that when we apply that to everything, that's a really transformative idea. When we're talking about a very simple example, Mastercoin is doing their rideshare program. They said, hey, this whole idea of Uber and having problems with the regulators, well, why don't we just make Uber a DAC, and then it's done?
Exactly.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And once you have price discovery, all these sorts of things are able to happen.
That's what I'm talking about with sort of moving things away from traditional corporate structures that can be regulated and put pressure on, and just decentralizing everything so that there's nothing to put that pressure on. If you think about Uber, it's really hard to argue against it, or Lyft or whatever, one of these rideshare apps. it's really hard to argue against it unless you are either an existing taxi driver or somebody who is profiting from taxi services being kind of monopolized. If you're a regular person, you can now get a ride on demand for a cheaper price than you would have been able to pay before. So what's to lose about that?
One of the issues that people brought up over and over again is their pricing model is not flat or fixed, and so it's sort of in times of extreme demand, and I don't necessarily disagree with this, but some people do. In times of extreme demand, it favors people who are willing to pay maybe a few $100 to go a few blocks. You can always get a car, but like you said, when you have price discovery, you can always find someone willing to render a service at a price. But then the problem is, what if that price is beyond what you think is sane?
Well, I mean, that's also the idea of price gouging is total malarkey. I mean.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and
I agree as well, but I think there are a lot of people that don't.
I mean, price elasticity
Right.
is a very important thing to the economy, to life. I mean, if you look at systems to which don't allow price gouging, which really means allowing elasticity of demand, what happens is you have people dying in the streets because you can't quantify people who need it versus people who want it.
Sure.
And when you look at things like Sandy, where gasoline became a scarce commodity,
or water.
and you had people dying from cold exposure and things like that because they needed heat, they needed electricity. There were people who couldn't leave the house, and
they couldn't price it at a level that would really allocate it most efficiently because there was price gouging.
And people who did that got thrown in jail. I knew somebody who went around the block and said, "Hey, I'm driving all the way up the state, and I'm going to get some gasoline. I'm going to drive it back. Can I charge you $7 a gallon? And would that be something you'd be comfortable doing? You wouldn't have to wait in line. You wouldn't have to spend 4 hours waiting in line. Mm-hmm. Is this something you'd be interested in?" Everyone said sure, and then one of those neighbors called the cops on him and got him arrested.
Wow. Oh, it's too bad.
And what ended up happening? Now people don't have, price discovery is needed, and gouging in a system to which isn't manipulated by an oligopoly or a monopoly or government invention is the market-driven demand.
Right, I agree. I'm glad you brought that up, Jonathan, because it sounds like a case of basically determining transaction fees. Almost exactly like on the Bitcoin network, transaction fees to send Bitcoin from one place, transaction fees to move a person from one part of the city to the other. Those transaction fees can and should be determined by market mechanisms. If they're set by a board of directors, then it's like, okay, that's probably not the best way to do it, and I would kind of agree with you there. But, yeah, let the market decide, exactly, and there will be price.
EasyDNS is the Swiss Army knife for your domain names, helping meet their customers' individual needs since 1998. EasyDNS has been an outspoken critic of SOPA and CISPA. EasyDNS was an early supporter of Bitcoin, and now they are proud to sponsor this show. Do business with a company that shares your values. Get a 13% discount when you pay with Bitcoin. Go to bitcoin.easydns.com and be sure to use discount code LTB.
Hey listeners, in the cryptocurrency space, just like the Wild West, there are pioneers and explorers. Explorers don't want or need permission, also known as rules, because they're just mapping the terrain, testing the limits, and that would just slow them down. Pioneers don't initially need permission, but they do want rules. How else could you invest in building, whether a home or business, that'll last in an environment whose future rules you don't know? Both of these users serve a purpose and fill a need. It's worth considering, though. Are you an explorer or are you a pioneer? Back to the show.
Price is such an important piece of information that just tells you so much. But anyway, we're getting a little bit off track. But this is a great discussion about DAX and about transaction fees. I just want to ask you guys quickly, because we're short on time, but I want to ask you, Jeffrey, what do you think of MaidSafe, which everybody was buzzing about? MaidSafe is basically it's going to, according to, David Irvine, is going to decentralize computing. So you'd be able to log in with a couple of passwords from essentially any device, access all your files, all your apps, and it's, a completely decentralized method of computing where everything is encrypted and you're accessing your computing environment through a location that only you know and can be, conveyed by your passwords.
Well, I think the internet was created by the government for the government. And we've just all hung along for the ride. So when we look at the problems we have with the internet today, it's because it wasn't market driven. It wasn't created in an organic way. I mean, what we have now is sort of bootstrapped from what was created. But, a total overhaul of what we call communications over the internet, what we call the internet, I think would be awesome. I haven't looked at MaidSafe enough to make that determination, but all the people who I trust in this space are saying, oh my God, this thing is awesome. Mm-hmm. So I really want this to pass the test as well when I look into it.
I think that MaidSafe is sort of the latest incarnation in a lot of previous ideas to build decentralized services on top of IP networking. And if you go back throughout the time, like I've been tracking this space since even long before Bitcoin. And I was talking with some other pioneers. You had Adam Back on the show not long ago, excellent episode. And I was talking to Adam Back recently, who also has been involved in this space long before Bitcoin. He was the one who invented the proof of work that ended up being used in Bitcoin. Mm. And there are 4 or 5 failed projects that immediately come to mind that tried to do things like this that failed because they didn't have a blockchain and a distributed system and a proof of work and a value store that could now be resurrected with some Bitcoin or an altcoin or something that interoperates with Bitcoin to bring those ideas back to life. And MaidSafe, like I said, or rather like you said, I haven't looked at the actual technical implementation yet, so I can't speak to whether or not
it's not available yet. So
whether or not it's going to be MaidSafe, but something that delivers on these ideas of distributed trustless computing is going to be built, and it will use cryptocurrencies as its base idea to prevent abuse and to compensate people for their computing resources and storage resources. And that's pretty inevitable. It actually surprises me every single day that more cloud providers don't accept Bitcoin right now, because with cryptocurrencies, it becomes very easy to minimize counterparty risk. Like right now, if I want to use 1,000 machines from Amazon to run some scientific computation, I give them my credit card, and to get your accounts limits raised, you have to have a rep, and they have to know you and know that if you're going to bill $40,000 of computing time in 24 hours, that they're going to get paid for that. But it would be really cool if the infrastructure were in place to be able to use on-demand computing resources without really them risking more than a certain small threshold, because then you're just constantly settling. The idea of daily billing or monthly billing is a throwback to when we had to print out bills or even write bills or type bills and then put them in the mail and then return another piece of paper that instructs the bank to pay them and all of this. And so with cryptocurrencies now, we can do things like minute-to-minute settlement to keep counterparty risk at levels far below wherever possible for. And I think that's kind of the future of a lot of service providers. Things like MaidSafe or reincarnations of the many attempts that the cypherpunks had in the 90s are definitely going to become prominent. That there's a huge need for them, both from the service provider side because it reduces their risk, and from the customer side because it reduces the friction of the transaction. Everybody's going to win.
And I think fundamentally, when we're looking at why is it that this stab at the cypherpunk war is winning,
it's because of Bitcoin.
It's not because of Bitcoin. I would argue it's because we have one thing that they never had, which was price discovery. When in any system, when you add price discovery, it now becomes viable. So if you look at Tor, and if you look at the things that they're doing in this environment, right? Tor is a system to which, when you have a node, there's no incentive other than ideological as to why you would want to be a node on Tor. And what happens on Tor is that prices out people who want to do it for pragmatic reasons, because based on whatever locality you're in, you need to internalize the costs associated with both operating it and the risks associated with operating it. So, being a node on Relay, a relay on Tor is not without risks, especially dependent upon what country you're in.
Absolutely.
There are people in America who have gone to jail for being relays for Tor. And, when you have the price discovery mechanism, it doesn't matter how risky it is. It doesn't matter how onerous it is to do. That will be factored into the price. When you have price discovery, you have the ability to act. And I think what we're seeing with cryptography is now that we have a system for price discovery, that was the missing component in all these awesome cryptographic things. That now is why we're seeing all these awesome behaviors. And I think Bitcoin is this for money. But I think that the key innovation isn't Bitcoin, it's the blockchain. And the key reason why the blockchain works is because it facilitates price discovery in a way that cannot be shut down.
It's cryptography with good economics, right?
Yes. Well, there's there's Austrian economics and Keynesian economics, or as I like to call it, Keynesian economics and economics.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are actually about to head to the Let's Talk Bitcoin meetup. However, I just wanted to give you guys both the opportunity to add anything that we didn't cover or that you wanted to make sure we said.
Well, big news today is Gavin Andresen is stepping down as lead developer of the Bitcoin Core.
That's right.
Which is some pretty groundbreaking news. Fortunately, he's one of his posts on the Bitcoin Dev mailing list are some of my favorite, and he's always kind of been this stable source of what's best for Bitcoin in my eyes. And it was good news to me anyway to hear that he was sticking around as chief scientist, so he's still going to lend insight and whatnot. But that he was going to, I think you mentioned that his plan was to focus on some developing some other things.
Right. Well, I think he said he wanted to address some specific issues, and being the man in charge wouldn't allow him to sort of have a laser focus on one or two particular topics. And,
is that really the reason? I mean, of course, if I were him, I probably wouldn't.
No one at high level ever gets fired. They resign. Is what you're saying? Yeah, they have to take care of the kids.
Or any other reason. Like it could be anything.
4 years is a long time to have any job.
Sure, and I imagine there is such a huge amount of pressure, being asked to go to the CFR, speak to the
maybe just
CIA.
wants his inbox back.
Right.
Yeah,
but also how underappreciated of an asset is he?
Yeah.
So you look at everyone
it's a thankless job for sure.
Who, not to make it a governmental example, but people who run an institution and then go work for the free market and get 10 or 20x. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if daily he gets hounded with absurd levels of salaries to work for X company or Y company. And, if that's the case, I think no one deserves it more than he. But I mean, fundamentally, we keep talking about Bitcoin as this awesome decentralized thing. And one of the things that sort of hurts my soul is, when we talk about Bitcoin, we're really talking about 100 or 200 so developers. And when we look at someone who had as much concentrated power via clout, not necessarily power over the system, as Gavin Andresen, I think that however much power and influence and just great support they were able to provide this network, as it matures and as we wish it to become more decentralized, that their time has been served. That we really need for as a community to grow beyond them to be able to have as much influence as they do currently have. So if he's stepping down, I think that is probably the most healthiest thing for Bitcoin, because while he's still contributing and he's still being a part of the discussion, I think that his ability to sway people to agree with him is having a sort of a groupthink mentality as what Bitcoin is and how it's evolving.
I definitely agree with you there that, the minute it starts to become about a person, we've kind of lost something important with Bitcoin. It's not about a person. Satoshi gave us a great gift, as I like to say, but it's not about him. It's about Bitcoin and it's about the technology that comes from it. So I think it probably is good to have some rotation in the prominent figures that, get sort of tapped with Bitcoin.
If only so that they don't burn out and run away.
Yeah. Oh, God. I mean, I can't even imagine what it would be like to have that job. Like speaking of burnout, wow. Gavin, take a vacation.
Yeah, when I have a typo in what I write, no one cares. When he has a typo in what he writes, $10 billion get angry.
Yeah. And a lot of people. So cool. All right. Should we say thanks and have a nice vacation?
Thank you, Gavin.
Yeah, please. I hope you take one. And we've got Vladimir stepping up as the core maintainer of Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, it's sort of a laser beam kind of job, right? You step right into that spotlight. And there's a lot of eyes. But like you said, having Bitcoin be about one person is definitely dangerous. If only just because we really don't want one person to face all of that stress and drama. Just there's enough drama in Bitcoin without the media spotlight manufacturing more, as I'm sure a certain man named Dorian can tell you. So the fact that there's turnover, and maybe that's something that can be formalized at some point. That might be a good Bitcoin improvement proposal.
Speaking of Bitcoin improvement proposals, Trace Meyer was talking about he wants to put a proposal in to officially change the name of an unconfirmed Satoshi into a Dorian.
That's it's not the first time I've heard that, and I think that's a wonderful idea. I was really happy to see that after the media spotlight that ruined that guy's month, a lot of Bitcoiners kind of banded together and set up a little fund for him and passed the hat. And I think it was
including Andreas.
Yeah, it's.
I thought he handled that really well. Just not trying to draw attention to him, just really try to compensate him, and that's it.
One of the things that I've always loved about Bitcoin and the people that flock to it is how nice everybody's been. Like the ecosystem is still really friendly, and it's refreshing to be in an environment where everyone is competing so heavily in this market for this very quantified thing. We have a very defined success metric in terms of number of Satoshi that are under your direct control, yet everybody's still really friendly and kind and courteous. Like we see a lot of, I saw one of the things that what made me really happy is I saw a Bitcoin donation company or organization. I don't know if they're a nonprofit. I didn't speak to them, but I saw them at the conference, and I thought that was really cool that there are people actually.
You're referring to BitGive.
Yes. There are people working on things that allow people to take this wealth and allocate it to people that are less fortunate. That's something that warms my heart a lot. It's easy to go down the rabbit hole of like capitalism, finance. We have to remember that Bitcoin's power to change the world extends far beyond the ability to just make a lot of money or secure your money or operate your business with impunity. It also allows us to enrich people's lives.
Yeah, not that there's anything wrong with making money, but it is impressive to see how generous the Bitcoin and even like altcoins. Okay, I have to say Doge. They're
very
do a lot
generous.
Of charity.
You wouldn't expect it from the crowd, and they come out in force. It's really excellent.
Right.
Yep, tip culture is huge with Bitcoin, and I really like that note to end it on. And we do have to get to the restaurant. Adam, I wish he was here because he would love the name. It's Suspenders. He always wears suspenders to conferences, like a journalist thing. I think we're going to sign off.
Thanks for listening to episode 105 of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Content for this episode was provided by Stephanie Murphy, Jonathan Mohan, and Jeffrey Paul. This episode was edited by Adam B. Levine. Music for this episode was provided by Jared Rubens, Calvin Henderson, and Niles Fromm. Any questions or comments? Email Adam at letstalkbitcoin.com. Have a good one.